Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. It's all about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album, the collaboration album between Wade Bowen and Randy Rogers, titled Hold My Beer, Volume 1. You know, I don't talk a lot about regionalism in country music. Because to most mainstream listeners, you'll never be able to tell. Unless you're in Canada and get a slice of Alberta country courtesy of the CRTC rules, most people would simply assume that if you get country music on the radio, it's out of Nashville. Especially with the increased amalgamation of radio across the United States. And that's often the furthest thing from the truth, given that there are subsectors of country music all across the US that have a distinctive sound and feel outside of the distinctly polished Nashville scene. So let's talk about one of those scenes today, and one that I've been too long in brushing over. Texas country. Commonly known as red dirt country music, it tends to blur lines between neo-traditional, plain-spoken respect for the working man, and rough-edged outlaw country, with brawnier guitars, a stronger acoustic flavor, a little bit more fiddles, and a heavier focus on lyricism and raw live performances. And while there have been plenty of countryweights throughout the decades that have hailed from Texas, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, in recent years there's been a potent resurgence as a backlash against Nashville's increasingly slick sound. And as bro country continues to collapse in upon itself, there has been speculation, especially in the independent scene, that red dirt country might work to fill in some of the vacuum. And honestly, it's not a bad thing. It's not like they don't have the quality to get there, as some of my favorite country acts of the past couple of years have come from this subgenre. Casey Musgraves, Miranda Lambert, Jason McMurtry, Jason Eady. We're talking about great acts dropping solid, if not downright excellent records, the best of their respective years in some cases. And thus, I shouldn't be all that surprised that well-respected acts in this vein might team up and take a stab at it together. In this case, we're talking about Wade Bowen and Randy Rogers, the latter of which have been slugging it out in the Randy Rogers band on the far outskirts of mainstream country, and unfortunately got kind of sucked into the swirling eddy that was the overly slick pop country of the mid to late 2000s. Incidentally, around the same time I stopped listening to a lot of country music. Wade Bowen, he comes from a similar era, but he tends to stick to more personal material and stronger songwriting, and thus has been less popular. Yeah, I know I'm really late to the punch here in covering this album again, but could a team-up record titled Hold My Beer Volume 1 be the record they need to take them over the top? Well, okay, probably not anywhere close to mainstream radio, but if you venture outside of it, Wade Bowen and Randy Rogers may have dropped one of the most remarkably solid, personality-filled, neo-traditional country records you will hear this year. And what I absolutely love is this is the sort of collaboration that does exactly what it needs to do. Plays to both men's natural charisma, pairs it with great traditional country tones, and gives us some solid songwriting to make the most of it. I'm not quite sure it's my favorite country record of this year. Jason McMurtry's Complicated Game is a damn difficult record to beat, but there's a sense of lightweight, hangdog struggle to Hold My Beer Volume 1 that's just infectious. For a guy who grew up on Brooks and Dunn, Alan Jackson, and George Strait, this album, it just works for me. I really liked it. But let's ask the question, why? And part of this starts with Rogers and Bowen himself. Both of them have solid enough voices for this sort of record. Heartfelt, rough-edged, filled with enough charm and charisma, make some pretty simple stories remain compelling. It's not a record that takes itself all that seriously, probably for a good reason, and Rogers and Bowen approach it with the ease of veterans, which you can definitely see in the interplay of their vocal harmonies. If I were to nitpick, it'd be that the two tend to have similar vocal ranges. Bowen's is a little bit higher and cleaner, Rogers is lower, a little bit rougher, and probably my favorite, and that can mean they don't get quite as much out of the interplay as they could. When you look at country duos like Big and Rich or Brooks and Dunn, the contrast is always some of the best parts of their music, and sometimes it's not as pronounced as it really could have been on this album, which I thought was a little bit of a shame, bit of a missed opportunity there. But really, the fact that they have any interplay at all puts them leagues ahead of many country duos and bands. Looking at you, Florida Georgia Line. And what was a real pleasant surprise that extends into a lot of the instrumentation as well. And make no mistake, this is traditional country in every sense of the word. Yeah, there are a couple of heavier guitars at some points, you expect this out of Texas, but not without banjos, fiddles, and steel guitar to match the acoustic grooves. And what I really need to highlight is the guitar work on this record. Yeah, the textures and production are a little bit more polished than I'd usually prefer, but the interweaving solos and the thicker grooves have enough snarl and edge to play off each other incredibly well. Take the synchronization on both electric and steel guitars, and I have my hopes up high, which even threw in some organ swell in the 4th and 5th verses and a fiddle solo because it wasn't awesome enough yet. Of course, like with most traditional country, I do wish they experimented just a little bit more with different chord progressions, and some of the weaker songs on this album fall into this pattern of not experimenting enough, as there are a fair few songs that don't sound that far removed from others in the genre. But I was struck by a number of points where compositionally, Rogers and Bowen did manage to switch things up, typically by making the progressions a little bit more staccato and jittery. And when you have moments like the bass opening and guitar solo on Good Luck With That, that striking melodic progression that drives standards, especially on the slightly off-kilter chorus, the more melancholy El Dorado that's easily the album highlight, highlight for the attention done to the layering, especially with that electric guitar sizzling in the background throughout the verses, and that acoustic moment during the bridge and final chorus that just hits me like a ton of bricks every single time, and then goes for an entire minute of Soul's amazing song, and then on the chorus melody of Hanging Out in Bars. You can recognize the attention to detail here and melodic construction that shows a ton of meticulous craftsmanship, and yet they make it look easy. And even though I did find some of the thicker twang of Ladybug just even a little bit too thick for me, that old-fashioned vibe of the track was still executed well enough to really win me over, especially with the harmony on the ending chorus. It sounded fantastic. But now we need to go onto lyrics and themes, and the first thing that comes apparent is the choice of tone. Bowen and Rogers play the entire album with a sort of rollicking camaraderie that comes with longtime friends trying to make it on their own, and play with just enough self-awareness to keep a smile on their face. Specifically, they aren't afraid to take a hard look at the music industry and what they've been going through. The country music press first went wild about standards, the song that sounded to get the most attention of both men rejecting mainstream success in favor of cultivating artistic integrity, which I can definitely respect, but they aren't afraid to show the costs of making that sort of decision, or being headstrong for all of the wrong reasons. I mean, we have Till It Does, Good Luck With That, Hanging Out in Bars, and the Willie Nelson Merle Haggard cover that closes the album, Reasons to Quit, shows the duo paying the price for neglect towards women or the hardships that come with their careers, especially after 15 years in the industry. In fact, if we're looking for a thematic undercurrent of this record, it'd be the question of whether or not it was all worth it. A question that the record never really directly addresses, with songs like Ladybug praying for something to break the drought, which can obviously be a metaphor for their success in the music industry, or especially El Dorado calling to mind a lonesome cowboy accepting that he can't always find that lost goal, and some form of relief instead of just endless wandering. You can really view that song as the more abstract form of standards, with the goal being fame or fortune promised by an industry that rarely ever pays due and pays off for artists with their level of talent. Rogers and Bowen are just simply being realistic about it, and while that life takes its toll, that optimism that they approach the songs here makes you want to root for these guys. They play themselves as underdogs, and honestly, it works really well because they have the level of charisma and level of depth in songwriting to make it work. So overall, this is a record that lays all its cards on the table right away, and it's exactly what you think it'd be. A relatively lightweight, steadfastly neo-traditional country record, with Bowen and Rogers playing the guys who have seen enough of it all just to shrug and keep on trucking. And while there are moments where I wish they had delved a little bit deeper or taken it a little bit more seriously, it's been a great afternoon as the only track that I'd routinely skip, of only being a pretty basic hangover revival song. I've just seen a lot of that before. That was never really the intention of this record anyway, and I can respect that. And it doesn't take away from the record being incredibly solid, immediately catchy, excellently performed, and well written to boot. For me, easy 8 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation if you're a fan of this brand of neo-traditional country. For more modern country fans, it's definitely on the less cool side of the genre, but who the hell should give a damn about country music being cool, for God's sakes? And besides, the way Texas and red dirt country is growing in the mainstream, I reckon it won't be that long before we get more of this actually on the radio. Cycles like this has happened before. Look at the 1980s. It's only a matter of time. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.